My stepchildren looked me in the eye and said, "You're not the one who raised us, and stop pretending." So I stopped showing up, stopped paying their bills, stopped answering their calls. When they suddenly asked where I went, their real mother already knew the answer. The woman on the line asked which accounts I wanted to review. All of them, I said. I need to close what's mine and freeze what I'm still attached to. She read them back to me one by one, and I sat on a hotel bed in yesterday's dress, still smelling like the dinner I hadn't finished. Listening to 12 years of my life get reduced to a list of numbers. The joint card opened the year Jonathan and I got married. Ryan's auto insurance paid from my account since the day he turned 16. Chloe's art program, $3,000 due to process at 9 a.m. sharp. The mortgage escrow line Jonathan didn't even know I'd been quietly covering for 2 years, ever since his contracting business nearly went under and his pride wouldn't let him ask twice. "Confirm the freeze on all 4? She asked. I looked at the folder open on the bed beside me. 12 years of receipts, 12 years of being the one who showed up. I thought about Ryan's face at the table 12 hours earlier. "You don't need anything from me." "Yes?" I said. "Freeze all 4. Effective immediately." "And the art program payment scheduled for 9 o'clock? I checked the clock. 8:52. 8 minutes. Somewhere across town, Jonathan was probably still asleep, certain that last night would blow over the way everything always had. "Cancel it," I said, "before it processes." The woman went quiet for a second, typing. "That change is being submitted now. You'll see it reflected within the hour." I hung up and set the phone face down on the bed. It buzzed instantly, screen lighting up against the sheets. Jonathan's name. I left it face down and did not move. My name is Megan Caldwell. I'm 44 years old, and until the night before that phone call, I thought I understood exactly what my life was. I'm a senior claims auditor for a regional insurance consortium based in Portland. 19 years in the industry, the last 11 of them specializing in fraud pattern detection. It's not a glamorous job. Most people's eyes glaze over when I explain it at parties, but it means I've spent 2 decades learning to notice the small inconsistency that unravels the whole story. A date that doesn't match. A signature that's a half-degree off. A pattern of withdrawals that looks ordinary, until you lay it next to 12 other ordinary patterns and see the shape underneath. I met Jonathan Caldwell. Well, he wasn't a Caldwell yet, and neither was I, at a client dinner in 2013. He ran a small contracting business, mostly residential renovations, and he had the kind of tired, decent face that made you want to feed him a real meal. His wife, Rebecca, had left 8 months earlier, moving to Sacramento with a man she'd met at a trade show. She called it finding herself. Jonathan called it, quietly, over his second glass of wine that night, surviving. His kids were 8 and 10. Ryan was the older one. Already guarded in the specific way children get when an adult they trusted has proven unreliable. He kept his hands in his hoodie pockets and studied me like I was a home inspector who might find something wrong with the foundation. Chloe was 10, with a gap where her front teeth should have been. And she warmed to me faster. Kids that age often do, before the world teaches them not to. I didn't marry Jonathan to become anyone's mother. I want to be honest about that. Because I think honesty is the only thing that makes what came later make sense. I married him because he made me laugh. Because he cooked terrible pasta with too much garlic and didn't apologize for it. Because he looked at his children like they were the only good thing he'd managed to hold on to. I fell in love with a man who was drowning quietly and doing it with dignity. And some part of me, the auditor part maybe, the part that likes fixing what's broken, decided I could help carry the weight. So I did. For 12 years, I did. I made their lunches until they were old enough to make their own, and then made them anyway. Because Ryan liked turkey and Swiss, and never learned to like it any other way. And there's a kind of love in remembering someone's turkey and Swiss for a decade. I drove them to school when Jonathan's jobs ran early. I drove them to dental appointments, to the emergency room the night Ryan broke his wrist skateboarding, to college visits when Ryan was 17 and terrified and pretending he wasn't. I paid for tutors when Chloe struggled with math in 6th grade. I paid for the art program that gave her somewhere to put all the feelings she didn't have words for yet. I paid for insurance, for tuition, for the small emergencies that arrive in a family like weather. When Jonathan's contracting business nearly collapsed in 2019, a bad partnership, a lawsuit from a client who claimed shoddy work, 18 months of hemorrhaging money before the dust settled. I used my own savings quietly to keep the mortgage paid. I never told him the full amount. I told myself it didn't matter, that we were a family, that money moving between people who loved each other wasn't a transaction to be tallied. Their mother, Rebecca, floated in and out on her own schedule. She showed up for birthdays when they were convenient, for holidays when Sacramento got lonely, and vanished for the ordinary months in between. The ones full of homework and stomach blues and the unglamorous labor of raising two people into adults. I never competed with her for the children's affection. I never badmouthed her. Not once. Not even when Chloe cried on her 12th birthday. Because Rebecca forgot to call. I never asked Ryan or Chloe to call me their mother. I understood, even early on, that the word belonged to someone else. And I didn't need it. I only asked for ordinary respect. The kind you'd offer anyone who drove you to the emergency room at 2 in the morning and held your hand while a doctor set your wrist. I thought I had earned that much. I was wrong about a lot of things, it turns out. I just didn't know it yet. The first crack came 18 months before that dinner, though I didn't recognize it as a crack at the time. I told myself it was nothing. Ryan had just turned 20, home from his second year of community college, and I overheard him on the phone with a friend in the driveway. "Yeah, Megan helps out," he said, in a tone that made the word help sound like an accusation. "It's not that deep. She just likes being needed, I think. Makes her feel important." I stood in the kitchen with a colander of pasta in my hands and told myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded. 20-year-olds say careless things. I'd said careless things at 20. I let it go. The second crack came 4 months later. Chloe, 17 by then, had stopped hugging me hello. It happened so gradually I couldn't point to the day it started. 1 month, she was still leaning into me in the kitchen doorway the way she'd done since she was 10, and the next month there was a foot of space between us that hadn't been there before, and I couldn't explain when it had opened up. I told myself teenagers pull away from everyone. It was developmentally normal. I'd read the articles. The third crack was harder to rationalize. I found out by accident that Ryan had told his college roommate I was his dad's wife, not his stepmother. Not anything closer than that. Technically accurate. Something about the specific choice of words sat in my stomach for 3 days, like a stone I'd swallowed. I brought it up with Jonathan, carefully, the way you'd mention a strange noise in the car engine. "Do you think the kids feel weird about how close we are? Like maybe I overstepped somewhere?" Jonathan didn't look up from his phone. "They're just going through something. Teenagers. It'll pass." I told myself he was right. I had no evidence yet that he wasn't. The fourth crack came at Ryan's 21st birthday dinner, 7 months before everything finally broke. I'd spent 3 weeks planning it, his favorite restaurant, a private room, a cake from the bakery he'd loved since he was 12. Rebecca flew in for it, which she rarely did anymore. At the end of the night, Ryan stood to make a toast, and he thanked his dad for always being there, thanked Rebecca for flying all this way, thanked his friends for coming. He didn't mention me. Not once. I'd paid for the private room, the cake, half the guests' meals, and I sat there smiling with my hands folded in my lap, while my name simply failed to exist in his gratitude. I drove home that night and cried in the car in our own driveway for 11 minutes before I went inside, because I didn't want Jonathan to ask what was wrong and hear myself try to explain something that sounded, out loud, like nothing. He forgot to thank me at his own birthday. It sounded petty. It sounded like I was keeping score. So I wiped my face, reapplied my mascara in the visor mirror, and went inside and said the party was lovely. The fifth crack, the one that should have told me everything if I'd let it, came 3 months before the dinner that ended it. I overheard Chloe on the phone with Rebecca, home for the summer between her freshman and sophomore year of college. "I know Megan paid for it," Chloe was saying, voice pitched low, clearly not expecting anyone to be in the hallway. "But it's not like she's actually my mom." It's just money. It doesn't mean what it would mean if it was you. It's just money. 12 years of turkey and Swiss lunches and emergency room nights and quietly rescued mortgages, reduced to a phrase that made me sound like an ATM with better hours. I didn't confront her. I told myself, again, that it was a private conversation I wasn't meant to hear, that context mattered, that Chloe was 20 and figuring out complicated feelings about her actual mother, and I shouldn't read too much into a sentence fragment. I kept telling myself that, right up until the night at the dinner table, when Chloe said almost the exact same thing to my face, and Ryan agreed with her, and Jonathan said nothing at all. That night, at our dinner table in Portland, I lost even the ordinary respect I'd asked for. Rebecca was visiting. She did that more often now that the kids were adults and the visits came without the responsibility of actually parenting them. And I'd made a roast, the kind of dinner that takes 4 hours and a level of care nobody asks you to give, but you give anyway. Because caring for people through food was a language I'd learned to speak fluently over a decade. Chloe leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "You always do this," she said. "You act like you're a mom." The room went still. I looked at Jonathan. He studied his plate like it contained the answer to a question he didn't want to hear asked out loud. Ryan's mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're not the one who raised us. Stop pretending." Not shouted. Just final. The kind of sentence you can tell someone has been sitting on for a while, waiting for the right moment to set it down. Rebecca lowered her eyes to her wine glass. She was smiling into it. "Is that how you both feel?" I asked. And I heard my own voice come out steadier than I felt. Chloe shrugged. The particular shrug of someone who has already decided the conversation isn't worth her full attention. "You helped Dad. That's different." "You chose this," Ryan added. "We never asked you to." Jonathan finally spoke. "Megan, don't make this bigger than it is." I looked at him. 12 years, and this was the moment he chose to protect his own comfort instead of my dignity. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look surprised, which was somehow worse than if he had. It told me this wasn't the first time he'd heard this sentiment from his children, only the first time he'd heard it said to my face. I stood up. For 12 years, I had paid Ryan's insurance, Chloe's tuition, the mortgage when Jonathan's business nearly collapsed, all from accounts with my name on them, all because I loved being needed, or because I genuinely did not know how to stop. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. Not one word. I went upstairs, packed one suitcase, and took the folder I'd kept in the back of my closet for years. Every transfer, every payment, every account number, organized and dated, the way I organize everything. Because that's simply how my mind works, and I'd never once imagined I'd need it for this. I'd built that folder without ever planning to use it as anything but a habit. Some part of me, I think, always knew this dinner was coming, even while the rest of me refused to believe it. Downstairs, I heard Jonathan laugh at something Rebecca said, like nothing had happened, like I'd already stopped existing in that house the moment I left the table. I drove to a hotel near the river and didn't sleep. I lay on top of the covers, still in the dress I'd worn to my own dinner table, and stared at the ceiling until the sky outside turned from black to the flat gray of a Portland morning. At 6 a.m., I called my bank. By the time the account freezes cleared, a little after 10 that morning, my phone had 14 missed calls from Jonathan and 3 texts that all said some version of "Call me. This is insane. You're overreacting." I didn't call back. I called someone else instead. Jennifer Brooks had been my divorce attorney's name in my phone for 3 years, ever since a coworker recommended her during a period when my marriage had wobbled and then, I thought, steadied. I'd never used the number. I used it now. MS. "Caldwell," she said, when I finally got through that afternoon. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" Jennifer Brooks had practiced family law in Oregon for 22 years, and when I laid out the situation, 12 years of documented financial contributions, no prenuptial agreement, a husband whose name was on almost nothing of substance, while mine was on almost everything. She went quiet in a way I'd learned to recognize as her thinking mode. "Send me the folder," she said. "All of it. Every transfer. Every statement. I want to see the full shape of this before we talk strategy." I drove to her office that same afternoon with the folder in my lap like it was something alive. She spent 40 minutes flipping through it, occasionally making a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, that I couldn't interpret. "Megan," she finally said, "do you understand what you've actually built here? This isn't just a folder of receipts. This is 12 years of a financial relationship almost entirely structured around your assets, your accounts, your credit. Jonathan's name is on the house, yes, but the mortgage payments for the last 2 years, the insurance policies for both children, the tuition, all of it traces back to accounts solely in your name." "I know," I said. "I built it that way without thinking about it. I just paid for what needed paying." "That instinct," she said, "is about to matter a great deal." She recommended, gently but firmly, that I bring in a forensic accountant before we went any further, not because there was fraud in the traditional sense, but because untangling 12 years of homing-led finances between a marriage and 2 stepchildren, who'd never been legally anything to me, required precision I couldn't trust to memory or good intentions. That's how I met Andrew Foster. Andrew Foster had spent 16 years as a forensic accountant, the last 9 of them specializing in divorce and estate disputes, for a firm 2 floors above Jennifer's office. He had the calm, unhurried manner of a man who had seen every possible way people's finances could tangle themselves into knots, and nothing left him rattled. I met him 3 days after the dinner, in a conference room with my folder spread across the table like evidence at a trial, which I supposed it now effectively was. "Walk me through it," he said. "Every account. Every payment. In order." I did for 2 hours while he took notes in small, precise handwriting and stopped me only to clarify a detail, recurring or one-time. Did Jonathan know about the escrow line, whose name was actually on the art program invoice? By the end, he'd built something I hadn't quite let myself see before, a complete financial portrait of a marriage in which I had, without ever intending to, become the sole load-bearing wall. "Here's what I want to be honest with you about," Andrew said, closing his laptop. "This is going to be uncomfortable for everyone involved because the truth usually is, you've spent 12 years subsidizing 2 young adults who are not your legal dependents, using accounts that are entirely yours, without any agreement in place that protects your interest in any of it. If this goes to court in any capacity, divorce proceedings, disputes over the house, anything, the paper trail I'm about to build for you will show, in exhaustive detail, exactly how much of that household ran on your money and nobody else's." "I'm not trying to hurt them," I said. "I just don't understand how they don't see it." Andrew looked at me for a moment with something like sympathy. "In my experience, people rarely see the water they're swimming in, especially when someone else is the one keeping them afloat." He spent the next 9 days building what he called a full accounting. Every dollar, dated and sourced, cross-referenced against bank statements going back a decade. It ran to 61 pages. He labeled it, at Jennifer's request, in a way that made my stomach turn every time I read the header, Exhibit C, Caldwell Financial Contribution Summary. I hadn't thought of myself as evidence in anything. I was starting to understand that I already was. The freeze on the accounts had consequences within 48 hours, and they arrived in the specific, mundane way that real disasters usually do. Not with a bang, but with a series of small, humiliating administrative failures. Ryan's auto insurance lapsed at midnight 2 days after the dinner. He called me. Not Jonathan, me. In a panic, I hadn't heard from him since he was small. "Megan, my insurance got canceled. I got pulled over for a busted taillight and the cops said I'm not covered." "What happened?" I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds before I answered. "I closed that account, Ryan." "Why would you do that?" "You told me I wasn't the one who raised you," I said. "I'm trying to take that seriously." He didn't have a response to that. I hung up before he found one. Chloe's crisis came the next day, when the art program called to say her enrollment fee had failed to process and her spot in the summer intensive, the one she'd been talking about for months, the one that mattered to her more than almost anything else in her life, would be given to someone on the wait list within 24 hours unless payment was received. She called me crying, which she hadn't done since she was 14, and heartbroken over a boy who didn't deserve the tears. Megan, please, I know things are weird right now, but this is my whole summer, please. My hands were shaking when I answered her, not from cruelty, from the specific, terrible weight of watching someone you love hurt and knowing you have the power to stop it and choosing deliberately not to. I love you, Chloe, I said, and I meant it, past tense and present tense, both tangled together. But you told me I'm not your mother. Mothers pay for things like this. I'm going to let you find out what it costs when I stop. She hung up on me. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time afterward, and I will admit, because honesty is the only thing that makes any of this worth telling, that I cried harder over that phone call than I had over anything Ryan or Jonathan had said to me directly. Chloe had been 10 when I met her, gap-toothed and easy to love. Some part of the woman I'd been for 12 years didn't know how to stop being her mother, even now, even after being told I never was one. The third loop came from Jonathan, and it was the ugliest. He showed up at Jennifer's office building, not the office itself. Security wouldn't let him pass the lobby without an appointment, but he stood in the lobby for 40 minutes calling my phone until I finally answered from the conference room upstairs. Megan, this is insane. The mortgage payment is due in 6 days. Do you understand what happens if we default? Do you understand what this does to my credit, to the house? Our house, I said. Except it isn't, is it? It's your house. My name isn't on the deed. It never was. Silence. You never told me that bothered you, he finally said. I never let it bother me, I said. That's the part I'm working through right now. He sent me 17 texts over the following 2 days, cycling through what Jennifer, when I showed them to her, called the classic pattern: anger, then bargaining, then something that looked almost like grief, then anger again. You're punishing the kids for something that isn't their fault. You're being cruel. I don't even recognize you right now. Please, Megan, just talk to me. I saved every single one. Andrew added them to the file. The fourth loop was the one that nearly broke my resolve entirely because it came from an unexpected direction: Ryan's college. 9 days after the dinner, I received a call from a financial aid officer at Ryan's university, informing me that a tuition installment, one I had apparently set up as an automatic recurring payment 3 years earlier, and then genuinely forgotten about, buried under a dozen other automated pieces of my financial life, had failed. And Ryan was now at risk of being administratively withdrawn from his summer courses within 5 business days if the balance wasn't resolved. I hadn't frozen that account on purpose. I'd frozen everything I could identify in the panic of that 6 a.m. call, and this had simply been swept up in it. I sat with that information for 2 full days, turning it over. Did I want Ryan to fail his summer courses? No. I wanted him to understand, in his body, and not just as an abstract idea, what 12 years of quiet support had actually been holding up. I wanted him to feel the specific vertigo of realizing the floor had always been someone else's floor, but I didn't want to be the reason he lost a semester of his education. Those were 2 different things, and I needed, for my own sake, to be able to tell them apart. I called Jennifer. I want to reinstate that one payment, I said. Just that one. Not because he's earned it back, because I don't want to be the kind of person who lets a 20-year-old's education collapse to prove a point. That's a reasonable distinction, Jennifer said, and for what it's worth, it's the kind of distinction that will matter if any of this ever becomes a legal dispute. Generosity that continues even in anger reads very differently than generosity used as a weapon. I reinstated the tuition payment. I did not tell Ryan I had done it. I let him believe, for reasons I'm still not entirely sure I can defend, that the system had simply corrected itself. I wasn't ready to be thanked for something I'd done out of my own complicated conscience, rather than any reconciliation between us. The 5th loop, the one that finally pushed everything toward its breaking point, came from Rebecca. 12 days after the dinner, she called me directly for the first time in 12 years, and her voice had a brittleness I hadn't heard before. I need to talk to you about something, she said, off the record, just us. We met at a coffee shop near the river, the same neighborhood as the hotel I'd stayed in that first night, though I didn't mention that. Jonathan's asked me to move back, she said, without preamble, not romantically, just to help, with the kids, with the house, while everything with you gets sorted out. He said it might be temporary. I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. And are you going to? I don't know, she said, but I want you to understand something because I don't think anyone else is going to tell you the truth about this. Jonathan didn't defend you at that dinner because some part of him has resented you for years, not for anything you did wrong, for everything you did right. You made it too easy. He never had to be the one who fixed it because you always did first. I sat with that for a long moment. It was, I realized, the most honest thing anyone in that family had said to me in 12 years, and it came from the one person I had every reason to distrust. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Rebecca turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, not quite meeting my eyes, because Chloe called me crying about the art program, and Ryan called me about his insurance, and I realized, sitting there listening to both of them, that I've spent a decade doing exactly what Jonathan does, letting you be the floor so none of us ever had to build one ourselves. I'm not proud of that. I don't expect you to forgive me for it. I just didn't want you to walk into whatever happens next without knowing the actual shape of what you're dealing with. I didn't respond to that with grace. I want to be honest about that too. I told her I needed to go, and I left half a coffee on the table, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to drive. I called Jennifer that evening and told her everything Rebecca had said. This changes the calculus somewhat, Jennifer said after a pause, not the financial facts. Those don't change no matter who says what over coffee, but it tells us something important about how Jonathan is likely to respond if this moves toward a formal separation. If Rebecca moves back into that house in any capacity, even ostensibly to help with 2 adult children who don't need helping in the way she's imagining, you need documentation of every dollar that changes hands from this point forward. Not because I think you're vindictive, because I think you're about to be accused of being vindictive, and the only defense against that accusation is precision. This was when Detective David Mercer entered the story, though not for the reason you might expect. There was no crime, not exactly, nothing prosecutable, nothing that would ever see the inside of a courtroom in the way true crime implies. But 3 weeks after the dinner, Jonathan, desperate, humiliated, and apparently convinced that some kind of fraud had been committed against him, filed a report with the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit alleging that I had illegally withheld marital assets. Detective David Mercer had spent 17 years with the Portland Police Bureau, the last 6 specifically assigned to financial and elder fraud cases, and he called me on a Tuesday afternoon with the particular flat, careful tone of someone who has made this exact call many times before and knows exactly how it usually goes. Ms. Caldwell, I need to ask you some questions about a report filed against you, she said. I want to be upfront that in cases like this, once I actually look at the documentation, roughly 8 out of 10 times, there's no criminal matter here at all. It's a domestic dispute wearing a police report as a costume, but I do have to look. I sent her everything, every account statement, every transfer record, Andrew's 61-page summary, even the text from Jonathan that Jennifer had archived. She called me back 4 days later. Ms. Caldwell, she said, I want to be direct with you. There's no crime here. Every account you closed was solely in your name. Every dollar you froze was money you had every legal right to control. What your husband is describing isn't theft. It's the end of an arrangement he benefited from for over a decade without ever formalizing his own contribution to it. I'm closing this as unfounded. I'd also gently suggest, off the record, that he speak with an attorney of his own before he does something like this again. Filing a false report, even out of genuine confusion rather than malice, can have consequences he may not be anticipating. I hung up the phone and sat very still in my kitchen. My own kitchen now, a small rental apartment. I had signed a lease for 9 days into this, because I couldn't stay in that hotel forever and I wasn't going back to that house. And I felt something unclench in my chest for the first time in 3 weeks. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was closer to vindication, and vindication, I was learning, felt colder and quieter than I'd expected. The crisis peaked 6 weeks after the dinner, on the day the divorce filing became public, and Jonathan's business partner, a man named Michael Bennett, who had weathered the 2019 near collapse alongside Jonathan, learned the full financial picture from a mutual friend at their contractors association. Michael called Jonathan, and according to what Jonathan later told a mutual acquaintance who eventually told me, the conversation was brutal. Michael had believed for 6 years that Jonathan pulled the business back from the brink through grit and smart renegotiation with vendors. Learning the household had actually survived those 18 months because his wife quietly liquidated her own retirement savings to cover the mortgage. Money Jonathan never disclosed, not to Michael, not even fully to me, reportedly changed how Michael saw him. Not because Jonathan had done anything illegal, because he'd let everyone, including his own children, believe a version of the story where he'd been the one holding everything up. I had 24 hours that week to decide whether to release the full financial summary to my own attorney for the divorce proceedings or to try, one more time, to resolve things privately with Jonathan before the paperwork made it permanent and public in the specific way that legal filings become discoverable. It was Jennifer who laid it out plainly. This is the moment, Megan. Once this filing goes in with full financial disclosure, there's no version of this where Jonathan's children don't see, in exact dollar amounts, precisely how much of their lives ran on your money. That's not cruelty. That's just what financial transparency in a divorce looks like. But I need you to be certain you want that, because you can unring this bell. I thought about Ryan's insurance lapsing. I thought about Chloe crying over the art program. I thought about Jonathan's laugh drifting up the stairs while I packed a suitcase in the room above him. I thought mostly about the folder, the one I'd kept for years without ever planning to use it, the one some quiet, unacknowledged part of me had always known I might someday need. File it, I said. Full disclosure. Let them see it. The truth came out in layers, the way it always does, and each layer landed with its own specific weight. The divorce filing itself was a matter of public record within days, and while the general public has no reason to care about one contracting company owner's divorce, the specific detail that surfaced, a household sustained for over a decade by one spouse's income and savings with the other spouse's name on almost none of the underlying assets, became exactly the kind of story that spreads through small professional circles like Jonathan's Contractors Association with startling speed. Michael Bennett wasn't the only business contact who heard it. Within a month, 2 other contractors who'd referred work to Jonathan over the years quietly stopped. Ryan found out the full number, the actual dollar figure Andrew's accounting had produced, the sum total of 12 years of insurance, tuition, tutoring, mortgage rescue, and ordinary care during the divorce mediation. When the financial disclosures were read aloud in a conference room, he'd been required to attend because some of the disputed assets nominally involved him as a beneficiary of certain accounts. I wasn't in the room for that specific reading. Jennifer was. She told me afterward that Ryan had gone very pale and asked quietly whether the number was a typo. It wasn't a typo. It was $187,400 spread across 12 years, documented to the dollar. Chloe found out differently from her mother of all people in a conversation Chloe later described to me months afterward when she finally called. Rebecca had sat her down and told her, plainly, that the art program, the tutoring, 3 separate semesters of tuition gaps, and a hospital bill from a bicycle accident when Chloe was 15 had all come from Megan's accounts, not her father's, and that I had never once mentioned it to either of them in 12 years. Why didn't you ever tell us? Chloe asked me when she finally called 4 months after the dinner. Her voice had lost the sharp edge it had at the table. It sounded smaller. Younger, almost. Because I didn't want it to be a debt you owed me, I said. I wanted it to be love. I think somewhere along the way I forgot that you can't actually give someone love and also keep a ledger of it without the ledger eventually becoming the only thing that's real. She was quiet for a long time. I said something horrible to you at that table. You did. I agreed. I didn't soften it for her. I'd spent 12 years softening things. I don't know how to fix it, she said. I don't know either, I told her honestly. I'm not sure it's the kind of thing you fix quickly. I think it's the kind of thing you rebuild slowly, if you rebuild it at all, and only if it's actually rebuilt with something real instead of guilt. Jonathan's reputation took the hit no one, including me, fully anticipated. It wasn't a public scandal in any dramatic sense. No headlines, no viral outrage. It was quieter and in its way more thorough. The story moved through his professional circle the way these things do, not as an accusation of wrongdoing, but as a recalibration of how people understood him. The man who'd survived his business nearly collapsing through his own grit turned out to have survived it because his wife quietly drained her own retirement account and never told anyone, including, in full, him. The man who prided himself on providing for his family turned out to have provided very little of the actual structural cost of that family for over a decade. He lost 2 long-standing contractor referral relationships within 2 months. His mortgage, without my quiet subsidization, went into a brief period of late payments before he refinanced under considerably worse terms than he'd have qualified for a year earlier. A fact Andrew's forensic work made painfully explicit in the divorce proceedings when questions arose about his true financial standing. He never filed another police report. Detective Mercer's gentle warning apparently had landed. He called me one final time, 8 weeks after the dinner, and for the first time in the entire ordeal, he didn't ask me to reconsider anything. "I keep trying to figure out when I stop seeing what you were actually doing," he said, and I think the honest answer is that I never started. I just let it happen because it was easier than looking at it. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in a year," I told him. "I'm sorry," he said. "It doesn't fix anything. I know that. I just needed you to hear it once without me asking for anything back." I believed him mostly. I've learned that belief and forgiveness are 2 entirely different transactions, and you can extend one without owing the other. It's been 11 months now since that dinner. I still work as a claims auditor. I still notice small inconsistencies for a living. It turns out that's simply who I am, professionally and otherwise, and I've stopped apologizing for the parts of my character that made me good at protecting myself once I finally let them. Ryan reached out 5 months ago. He didn't apologize outright. Not at first. He asked instead if I would meet him for coffee, and when I did, he spent most of the hour in a silence that felt less like sullenness and more like a man trying to find the entry point into a sentence he didn't know how to start. Eventually, he managed it. "I don't think I understood what you actually were to this family until you weren't in it anymore," he said. "That's a horrible thing to have to say out loud." "I know that." "It is," I agreed. "I'm not asking you to be anything to me again," he said. "I don't think I've earned the right to ask that. I just wanted you to know I finally see it." I told him I appreciated that, and I meant it, though I also told him because honesty, at this point, felt like the only currency I had any interest in trading in anymore. That seeing it and rebuilding trust around it were 2 very different projects, and I wasn't in any hurry to skip to the second one. Chloe and I talk occasionally now, mostly text messages, small and tentative, the kind you send when you're not sure the bridge you're standing on will hold your weight yet. She sent me a photo from her summer intensive last month, the one I'd nearly let her lose, the one I ultimately couldn't bring myself to take from her either, though I never told her that until she asked me directly, months later, whether I'd had anything to do with the payment mysteriously clearing after all. I told her the truth. She cried on the phone, and this time I let myself cry with her. Jonathan and I finalized the divorce 3 months ago. The house, appraised and divided according to Oregon's equitable distribution laws, ended up requiring him to buy out a portion of value that acknowledged, in the driest possible legal language, 12 years of financial contribution that had never been on paper until Andrew put it there. It wasn't vengeance. Jennifer was careful to remind me of that distinction more than once. It was simply what the math had always actually been, finally written down where everyone could see it. Rebecca and I don't speak often, but she sent me a message the week the divorce finalized. 3 sentences, no explanation needed. "I hope you find whatever you were giving all of us for free. I hope someone gives it back to you for once. You deserved that a long time ago." I read it twice and didn't respond right away. I'm still deciding what I think of her, and I've stopped feeling like I owe anyone an immediate answer about how I feel. I think about that 6 a.m. phone call sometimes, the woman on the other end of the line reading my accounts back to me one by one, the 8 minutes before the art program payment would have processed, the specific, terrible clarity of finally choosing myself after 12 years of choosing everyone else first. I didn't do it out of cruelty. I want that understood if nothing else survives of this story. I did it because I finally ran out of the specific kind of love that asks nothing in return and gets nothing back. And I discovered at 44 years old that there's a difference between being needed and being valued. And I had spent 12 years mistaking one for the other. Ryan told me I wasn't the one who raised him. He was right in the end, in a way he didn't intend. I wasn't the one who raised him. But I was the one who made sure he had insurance when he turned 16, tuition when he needed it, a roof that stayed standing when his father's business nearly took it down. I was the one who showed up. It turns out those are different things. It took losing all of it for either of us to understand that they always had been.